Thank you. So good afternoon, everybody. In my Capstone project, I investigated the impact of residential intensification on the urban forest in the neighborhood of Long Branch in Toronto. My topic connects land use planning, policy, forest retention, and community engagement in the urban landscape. So first, urban land use planning is really focused around developing and sustaining resilient, livable cities. Municipal planning policies and strategies have focused on the need for more intensive land development or smart growth instead of extensive growth in order to accommodate growing urban populations and reduce the sprawling development of the past. It's widely recognized that the maintenance and growth of the urban forest is a major component of supporting a resilient, sustainable city. Recent urban forest strategies have focused on the necessity of increasing the canopy cover across municipalities to capitalize on the ecological, social, and economic benefits of trees. So here we see a map of the neighborhoods that make up the city of Toronto. My project focused on the neighborhood of Long Branch, which is a 432 hectare neighborhood in the southwest corner of Toronto on Lake Ontario. Right now, the tree canopy in Long Branch is one of the defining features that attracts people to live in the neighborhood. The neighborhood had a legacy as a cottage community up until the 1930s, shown by the large wooded lots that characterize a significant portion of the neighborhood fabric. Many of the large diameter trees across the neighborhood are remnants of the pre-settlement forest that existed before the land was cleared for agriculture and the neighborhood was built out. So when we're making our planning decisions, we can't ignore that 60% of the city's forest resource is on private lands. And canopy loss is occurring as a result of private land parcel redevelopment. In Long Branch, development pressures in the community are evidenced by the 101 development applications submitted in the neighborhood between 2012 and 2019, which have contributed to city-sanctioned tree removals when approved. So here we can see a map that I created showing the lot severance applications that were submitted to the City Planning Department between 2012 and 2018. Of the 101 development applications, 59% have been approved for construction. And there are 17.8% of applications that have been submitted but have been deferred or are pending appeal, which could potentially increase this approval rate to 80%. The high percentage of approvals have facilitated an increase in residential density, but impact the existing tree canopy cover and the potential for tree planting. So one of my objectives of this project was to measure the amount of tree canopy lost on redeveloped properties. So I used Google Earth aerial imagery as a data source, and I digitized the canopy of 40 of the 58 properties in Long Branch that were approved for redevelopment since 2012. I excluded 3 properties that were just outside of the neighborhood boundary and 15 that are either undergoing construction or haven't been constructed yet, so there's no visible change on Google Earth. I used imagery from 2009 taken prior to development to digitize the tree canopy on the affected parcels because the pictures were relatively clear and they provided a good baseline to observe the change. I then cross-referenced that canopy change between 2009 and 2018 using Esri and Google imagery and identified whether canopy had been removed or remained in 2018. Here I'll show you a couple of examples of changes. So first, we have 84 24th Street. I promised that that image on the left is a lot higher resolution on a smaller desktop, so it was pretty clear to digitize. So that's the canopy as of 2009, and on your right you can see 2018. A lot severance was approved, 2 townhouses were built, and we see the red showing the canopy that's no longer there. Next we have 88 Laburnum Avenue. Again, on your left you see the 2009 canopy, and on the right you see 2018, where 2 large chunks of canopy were removed to make way for those townhouses. And finally we have 2 Ash Crescent. On this property, we see a large chunk of canopy removed in the backyard to make way for the townhouses. And in the front, you can also see that this tree probably had some limbs removed to make way for that driveway. So now we'll look at the numbers. So in terms of the redeveloped properties, the digitized area of the canopy on the 40 developed lots in 2009 was 1.1 hectares. The total area of canopy loss as of 2018 on these 40 parcels was 0.61 hectares. So that's a 55.7% canopy loss between 2009 and 2018 on redeveloped lots. I also wanted to digitize the canopy on adjacent properties because often we'll find that neighboring lots are also affected by this construction. So, and based on the 2009 data, I saw that there was just over 2 hectares on the adjacent properties. 0.49 hectares was removed. So that's a 24% canopy loss between 2009 and 2018 on adjacent properties of redeveloped lots. Then I also did want to look at potential canopy loss. So I did digitize the canopy on lots on which applications were submitted but refused, deferred, or pending approval by the city to examine the tree cover potentially susceptible to loss as a result of development. So there were 15 properties that were pending approval, 13 that were either withdrawn, refused, or deferred. And so that shows 28 more properties on which canopy is susceptible to removal. So the results from this canopy loss analysis in Long Branch indicate that approved residential intensification has predictably contributed to a reduction in tree cover in the neighborhood, which has been found in prior research of a similar kind. Another consequence of lot redevelopment is the higher amount of hardscape and reduced available growing space as a result, which is problematic because it removes the potential for new trees to be planted to increase the urban forest and eliminates their prospective ecological services. So next, I also wanted to look at any signs of decline on trees on adjacent properties to the redeveloped sites. So part of my objectives for the project, I used data collected from the Neighbourwoods inventory in Long Branch in 2018 and 2019 and looked at the defoliation and the weak or yellowing foliage ratings for trees on adjacent properties so that I could assess their condition. The average scores were actually fairly low, showing no significant negative impact, but it might be too soon to see signs of health decline, so further monitoring is needed to observe the impacts from trenching and soil compaction as a result of construction. So now we're going to shift gears a bit. We're going to get into the actual process in place to submit and appeal these development applications through the city. As part of my objective in the project, I evaluated the quantity of applications submitted in Long Branch, the workings of the system, and the role of the community engaging with it. And what I found is that the process, in my opinion, is quite complex, time-consuming, and frankly inefficient. So, just for some terminology, the types of development applications that I've referenced and that are being requested in Long Branch are called consents, which involve a change of the land configuration, specifically allowing for the severance of a property. And they're often coupled with minor variances, which are requested when a proposed project or development doesn't comply with the rules of the zoning bylaws. So this is usually related to height restrictions, setbacks from the road, floor space index, things like that. So now I'm going to run through a very simplified but hypothetical scenario here. Let's say we have a landowner in Long Branch who wants to apply for a lot severance so they can demolish the bungalow that's currently on their 50-foot lot, split it in two, and have 2 townhouses built on the property. They first have to submit an application to the Committee of Adjustment, or the COA. The COA is a city council appointed body comprised of citizen members and sanctioned under the Provincial Planning Act. The proposed development has to comply with the city's official plan and, as of 2018, the Long Branch Neighbourhood Character Guidelines, so as to ensure that this proposed development is in line with the existing built form and allows for green space. So the COA will be testing for that. And as of 2018, the Urban Forestry Department put forward a motion that was passed by City Council to more formally incorporate and improve tree protection through the COA process. So now applicants are required to submit more detailed documentation about the trees on the site, and the plans are provided to Urban Forestry to review and comment on the impact to the trees. Urban Forestry will then object, request a deferral, or confirm an application, maybe sometimes applying conditions to that application. And the COA is required to take that input into consideration when making their decision to approve or refuse the application. But they don't need to comply with the recommendation put forward, except in the case of city trees. So in this hypothetical scenario, let's say that Urban Forestry objects to this application, they provide that feedback to the COA, and the COA considers it, but they still go ahead and say, yes, you can go ahead and build that, sever that lot. So then we have a lot severance here. We also have a reduced canopy, so no action is taken further than that. this begs the question, what can we do? What action can be taken? So in Long Branch, we have the Long Branch Neighborhood Association, or the LBNA. They were formed in 2017 by community members in part to support residents contesting development applications. So the volunteers running the LBNA put in extensive time and resources into compiling pertinent documents and forms for these hearings, sourcing expert witnesses, and procuring participant testimony to use in appealing applications because of their determination to protect the tree canopy in the neighborhood. So we go back to our scenario here. In the COA portion of the scenario, the LBNA will also prepare and write letters for the hearing, and they'll meet with residents to answer questions and help them understand the impact of the application. This, plus the attendance at the hearing itself, adds up to about 33 hours of time, so just over 4 business days. But let's again say that the COA still approves the development. Now, within 20 days of that decision, the community can make an appeal to the Toronto Local Appeal Body, or TLab. This was formerly the responsibility of the Ontario Municipal Board, but as of 2017, the TLab was enacted under the City of Toronto Act and the Planning Act. So what happens in TLab? In short, a lot. Don't be scared overwhelmed by this slide. I'm not going to go through every step, but I just wanted to show you this is the simplified version of the steps in just that appeal hearing process. What I really want you to take away from it is the time invested by the LBNA into the process. Based on correspondence with volunteers, one TLab hearing requires approximately 115 hours of work over about a 6-month period, because that's how long, if everything works out, the actual scheduling of the hearing can take. So that equals out to just under 3 40-hour work weeks. Keep in mind, this is all volunteer-based. Most of the volunteers in the LBNA have full-time jobs. And right now, there are 11 pending TLab hearings that the LBNA is helping manage. So it's an extremely large amount of resources required. So back to our process one last time. The TLab will decide whether to approve the development application or not. And if they do decide to still go through after all these steps have been taken, we really have to ask ourselves, who's determining the future of our urban forest? The definitive decision given this system is that it's dictated by the COA or TLab members appointed by City Council. COA members aren't required to have knowledge of urban forestry and environmental planning. The reliance is on the input that's provided from urban forestry in the process. And the COA gets 1 day of training on everything they need to know to fulfill their roles. And the information that they receive is obviously not just limited to urban forestry. And there's no subsequent assessment to evaluate how much of the training results in any knowledge transfer. As for the TLab members, they're collectively expected to have experience in adjudication, mediation, knowledge of land use planning, and some background in urban forestry and environmental planning. And based on my review of the profiles of the TLab members, only 1 out of the 9 members explicitly mentioned any environmental engagement or experience, listing volunteering with the Bruce Trail Conservancy. The remaining members only detailed their experience in planning or estate law. And only 1 of these 9 members is in charge of a single TLab hearing. So there's a 1 in 9 chance of getting the 1 chair that listed any environmental engagement. So with that in mind, I just want to reiterate the current status of development applications in Long Branch. The total of 101 consent and related minor variance applications that were submitted since 2012, the 60 applications approved by these COA and TLab members, formerly OBA and B, but that's a 59% approval rate. And then when we look at the annual breakdown of applications based on the decisions made by the COA, we can see again that more applications are approved than not in the blue. So year in and year out. So doing this project really showed me that the community members in Long Branch dedicate extensive hours into understanding the development application process, and they have a robust capacity to contest the approval of developments that impact the tree canopy in their neighborhood. Long Branch is a relatively affluent neighborhood with a median household income just below the citywide average. So neighborhoods like Long Branch with an engaged community under the direction of an association have the ability to encourage participation in urban forestry initiatives, compared with neighborhoods that have a lower average income and no association. A study carried out in 2016 examined the uptake of programs aimed at increasing the urban canopy on both public and private lands. And the results showed that tree planting programs were most successful in affluent neighborhoods, where the existing canopy was highest and available planting space was lowest, as we heard earlier. This forces us to question how lower income, resource-scarce communities fare in comparison. How can these neighborhoods protect the tree canopy from development? Research has also shown a link between greater income and higher urban forest cover. In a survey across municipalities in the US, looking at how urban residents rate and rank positives and negatives of urban trees, higher income was linked with more positive attitudes towards urban trees. A literature review from 2018 also found that income-based inequity existed in the distribution of urban forest cover. So it's reasonable to infer that while residents of lower income neighborhoods see the benefits of the urban forest, pressing problems like affordable housing or employment are of a greater concern to address than development in trees. The time commitment required in understanding and engaging in the COA and TLab process is just not feasible for lower income communities when faced with these other pressing issues. Generally speaking, they simply can't afford to spend so many hours on urban forest advocacy. So the implications for tree loss in communities with limited resources, time, and knowledge really warrants further consideration, especially given the demands of the development application system I outlined. So at the end of the day, this process is a piecemeal approach to land use planning that evaluates things lot by lot and continues to threaten tree canopy. We can intensify our residential areas in this manner, but at what cost? These fine-scale changes have long-term cumulative impacts, and if a community like Long Branch is active and takes the time to understand the system, there is some protection, but the process itself isn't inclusive of planning for green infrastructure. If we want to continue to have sustainable communities that are still livable, this is clearly not the way we can achieve this. So thank you for listening to my project. Just some quick acknowledgements. Thank you to my internal supervisor, Danijela, for your unending support. Thank you to my external, Dr. Andy Kenney, for your invaluable insights. A huge thank you to Judy Gibson of the LVNA for providing me information, feedback, and who really made this project possible, and also to the entire LVNA. Thanks to my interns from the summer for the Neighbourwoods inventory, and a big shout out to Sheila and Fraser for letting us store our equipment at your home over the summer. And finally, thanks to my MFC class for really helping keeping me sane over the last 16 months.
Andy, are you still with us?
Yes, I'm still here. Couldn't find the unmute button, John.
Yeah, I figured. If you want to ask a question now, that's fine, or I can wait and go ask some audience members. What do you want?
Okay, why don't I start? And Jackie, thanks very much. That's great. You covered a lot of ground. Did a nice job too. Good, clear presentation. And it's a really important topic that's very apropos for where development is right now. And it's based on this, at least the way I see it, it's based on this idea that we want to reduce urban sprawl, and that's a good idea. But as we increase, and one of the main ways of reducing urban sprawl is to increase density or through intensification. Do you see this as a bit of a conflict with trying to sustain canopy cover? And I know you alluded to this in your presentation, but I was wondering if you'd talk to us a little bit more about that potential conflict.
Thanks, Andy. So yeah, it's definitely a conflict because we have to make these tough decisions where we decide, do we want to build, intensify the landscape while removing canopy? I just think that we can definitely, I'm not a planner, but I think that we can make these developments in a way that doesn't have to reduce the canopy so much, because it's still the buildings that I've seen in Long Branch, they are still pretty people are in the search of having their big home still within this intensified landscape. So I think it's just, we have to like look big picture, and the community-wide, larger scale changes that this will have when people are searching to have a bigger home within the smaller space that's available. Does that make sense? A little bit?
Yeah, that's great. So in other words, it's how you define intensification. If two people are living in a 1940s bungalow and you knock it down and replace it with a starter castle and two people live in it, is that really intensification in terms of reducing the pressure on the land?
Yeah, exactly. That's the problem that's being seen in Long Branch, at least. Yeah.
So you also alluded to very quickly this idea of I don't know whether you use the term potential canopy cover or not, but the idea that if you lose trees from the urban forest while you're trying to expand canopy cover, it's unfortunate. But if you lose space to grow trees, one might say that's tragic because it reduces our ability to meet those canopy cover goals into the future. So how would you, if you had funding and time, what sort of a project would you do perhaps in Long Branch to address that issue?
That's a great question. And I don't know if I can give you an answer right now, but that's a really important thing to ponder, because that is, like you said when we were corresponding about my paper, that is really the big issue. Like, where are we gonna, we have people who want to plant, and it's just where are we gonna plant them if we continue to have this intensified development. So I don't really have an answer for you, but it's definitely an important question to incorporate into further research.
Yeah, give that a little bit more thought. Thanks very much, John.
You're welcome, Andy. Thank you. I'll turn to the audience for questions now.
I'm not a forester, but I do have the benefit of a bit of travel, and two solutions that I've seen to this problem have come from different places. One is something I saw in Sweden, where they had a neighborhood where they had to build around the trees. And so people had trees coming out of their decks. They had sort of, they didn't build in the center of their lot, but they moved their house over. So that's one possible suggestion that you could, I don't know if you can convince the city of that, but or developers. And then the other thing that comes to mind is there's a number of initiatives going on worldwide where they're monetizing their green assets, and the value of a single tree has been up in the area of around $2 million if it's a mature tree. So when you put a $2 million tree on a lot, and then you're going to build a $2 million house, well, then you can sort of equate it, because people seem to have this, we monetize everything else. So if we did monetize our green space, maybe we get a little bit more attention.
Yeah, definitely.
You know what you think about that?
I think that's, unfortunately, the one way that people see value in trees, because also in Long Branch, because the canopy is so well established and they have so many large diameter, large canopy trees, people take it for granted. We passively enjoy that. And so people don't see any problem with taking down a tree on the property they're building because they have one maybe across the street. So if you do add that value, then maybe people will understand it. Yeah.
What I think might be the most practical suggestion is for all of Long Branch to be a heritage district under the Heritage Act, and to have a plan that really stresses the importance of the tree canopy is why the district is created. And I think that would pose a lot of formidable barriers to bad, decisions.
Yeah, and there's definitely a big effort in Long Branch because of the remnant forest they have. There are a number of trees that have been designated as heritage trees. But I guess also it goes back to like Long Branch is just one neighborhood, and the systematic issue is affecting neighborhoods across the city. So that's a good solution for there, but.
Hi, I was just wondering if you know what the species were of the trees that were removed in the study. Like, because I know most of the ash trees have probably been removed on
Yes.
residential streets, but
Well,
if that was a factor in the study.
Yes, it wasn't a factor in the study. I did actually attend one of the TLab, a part of one of the TLab hearings, 3 days of a 6-day hearing, and there were large diameter oaks that were and that seems to be the case because there is a pretty good oak population in Long Branch, so unfortunately that's the case.
So, Jackie, thank you so much. I've learned so much from you about the process at the fine scale and about the systematic issue. I think, what's your thinking? Is that at the level of the City of Toronto or it's at the bigger picture?
My understanding, trying to sift through the policy, is that the building code it has more weight. It's provincial, so like zoning compliance comes from the provincial level, so it has more weight. And tree bylaws are from the municipal code, so that's why the tree protection bylaws don't have weight compared with zoning. So I think I came across a motion that I don't know if it came out of Long Branch or somewhere else, but it was put forward to try and bring up the question of putting tree protection bylaw at a higher weight. And that would be a ministry level decision.
So just going back to your slide, who makes decisions about those trees on private property? At the end of the day, it's not us professionals. It's someone else who is not trained in land use planning or forestry or anything else, despite all efforts. Mm-hmm. And I think this shows the flaw of the system that doesn't work for the 21st century. It's at the higher level of land use planning that we have in Ontario. Thank you.
This is my chance to follow up Danijela, because that was sort of my question. So what's your next step? And this is not necessarily for Long Branch, but just in general. And it's what everyone's asking. What do we do about this problem? So if you could keep pushing to the province, it's either the province the province. What could we do, or TLab? I'm thinking you should give this talk or a short report. Should be mandatory training for anyone who joins TLab, that they have to have a 1 hour or watch your video. But in terms of the province, how do we get there? Short of a new revolution on the 21st century of reimagining it, how do we chip away at it, I think?
That's a really good question that I haven't really investigated, just because I was trying to understand the policy. But yeah, I think it is just, again, appealing through, or not, like submitting motions, I would imagine, or like again, I don't really have the actual answer because I don't understand as much how the system works.
Can we create a short manual, or what do we call it, a one-pager that everybody in TLab can take that willingness to read?
I mean, I'll do it. Yeah.
Like it's online,
Yeah.
Actually read this material, whatever.
Yeah, because
So they can't say they don't know, and then we don't have to rely on somebody on the Bruce Trail who actually happens to be there.
yeah, and that's why, like, I know, I'm sure Judy and the LBNA can speak more to this, but they've been really active about, like, the neighborhood character guidelines are helping to reinforce the official plan and the piece about green space too, not just built form, because that's kind of the avenue that you have to go through. But yeah, that's a good idea too.
Very well done, Jackie. I'm very impressed with what you've put together here, and coming from the heart of Long Branch, we're living this and breathing this every day. I think one of the things that really struck me in your presentation is the concept, because we are putting a lot of time and effort. We've been forced to put a lot of time and effort into it, but it is these other communities. So how do you think we could make the other communities aware of the risk that they're at, the benefits, like monetizing? I like the idea of monetizing it, but it's the risk they're at with climate change and with what's happening in the future. If they're not protecting their trees and they're not able to protect their trees, how could we make them more aware?
Well, in my opinion, just I've thought about this a bit, but I feel like because of the other issues that these communities, again, this is very generalizing, but these communities are facing other pressing issues that are day to day. So I think it maybe is on the onus of the public sphere to step in these kind of places where, like, I know that's kind of maybe the role of the public sphere to step in. That's my view, because they don't have the capacity.
Hey, Jackie. Thanks for the great presentation. I think you did a really great job touching on the nuance that a lot of the powers, whether the tree bylaws or applicable law, it isn't strictly in the city's court, that there's a provincial framework. I think that was spot on and a great point that hasn't really been made before. I think just wanted to make a quick contribution on what could other communities do. I work in the unit at City of Toronto where we do provide funding for community groups like Long Branch. And I know Long Branch is one of the few neighborhood associations that are actively doing this type of work and doing tree planting, community engagement events, very successful ones. So in the short term, short of legislative change, I think if Long Branch carries on with what they're doing, set an example and a model that other community associations can follow and build on that. Because I think there's a lot of great work that's being done already, and there's a lot of momentum that we can build on.
Thank you. We're running out of time. Got to move on to the next talk. Thank you, Jackie.